Welcome to this edition of Japan's Top Business Interviews. It's my great pleasure today to have with me Malik Roumane, who is the president of Edenred Japan. Malik, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Greg. Good afternoon.
Yes,
I'm happy to be with you today.
So how is it that you are in Japan? What have you been doing in your career? How did you wind up here? And what are you doing here? Tell us about that.
Look, it's been it's a bit of a long story, but it actually started more than 30 years ago. I'm from France. I was born in Brittany, and one day, I think 13 years old probably, a Japanese family came next to my home, and the father was actually starting to be the plant leader, plant general manager of Canon factory nearby, where I was living. So it was the first time I, see Japanese people, apart from TV, of course. Very interesting discovery. We became friends. I was teaching tennis to the children. The Japanese mother was teaching the piano to my sister. And, we happened to go to ski together. My mother was helping her when she was, she needed to go to the grocery so that she bring the right vegetables at home. And some years later, actually, I went to business school in Paris. And in the third year of this business school, I had to go to Japan. I didn't have to go to Japan. I had to go abroad. And then, this family was back in Japan at that time, but I said, it could be a good idea for me to discover Japan. I'm talking about the 1991, the time where Japan was pretty much a major economy. It's still a major economy, but probably the richest economy in the world. So going to Japan at that time was, great for a student like me. I was 19 years old. Most of my, fellow students from the business school would go to maybe England, Germany, Spain, Italy. Some of them would go to the US, but beyond that, Asia was, at that time we would talk about Hong Kong a bit, but Japan was a great opportunity. And I had the opportunity to go there thanks to this Japanese father, who told me, yes, okay, I'm going to take you in Canon. So I did 2 months in Canon, 2 months in NEC, overall 4 months in Japan, and it was great. You can imagine how these big Japanese companies, they would welcome foreign students and they would treat them so well. I was getting paid. I was, in a Japanese dormitory with my private room. I was... I could get food for free. I loved it, obviously. 1991 in Japan, I couldn't speak a word of Japanese. And after 4 or 5 months, when I came back to France, I said to myself, I need to go back to this country. I need to learn the language. And this is what I did. And then I ultimately, but probably we'll be talking about this after my business school. I joined a special program on Japan. It's called Nichi Futsukei Daigakuin, undergraduate program, that led me to come to Japan in the second year. And then after that, I stayed, went back to France, came back, then went back to Japan, etc. So it's been, coming back to Japan, leaving Japan for the past 25 years.
The Japan bug got you.
Sure, absolutely. And I think, once you come to Japan, if you stay for some years, you will know that, obviously. I think, even though at some point you say to yourself, okay, I'm going to go somewhere else and discover a different world, Japan is actually bringing you back, And I love it, it's a great... Tokyo is a great city. Japan,
so were you posted here with any companies before Edenred and worked here in another company?
Yes, well, actually, if I count, it's my third long stay in Japan. This time I've been almost 8 years in Japan. But I've worked in pretty much 4 companies along this history in Japan. I've worked in, if I go chronologically speaking, After I graduated, I started with working for Saint-Gobain. Saint-Gobain is a major French industrial group. I worked in Japan, then in Paris for overall 5 years. So it's a group that make materials, glass. It's a competitor to Asahi Glass, Nippon Sheet Glass, if you know these companies. Then I joined the luxury industry. I worked for Cartier, then Cleef and Arpels, overall 8 to 10 years, and Carrera y Carrera, Spanish jeweler. This overall 8 to 10 years, mainly Japan, but also in Europe. And I came back 8 years ago in the what we call the gastronomy, high-end fine food industry. A company called Classic Fine Foods. I was a general manager for a company which is importing high-end fine food for major restaurants, major hotels. And 2.5 years ago, and there's a link. The link is the restaurants. I joined Edenred. Edenred being a company which is the best companion of the working world. We deliver solutions for the employees. And the major one that we're delivering is a benefit called meal support, where we help companies to support their employees for their lunch financially. That's what I've been doing for 2.5 years right now.
So quite an amazing journey from sort of industrial materials, building materials, through to luxury goods, now into the food business, into Edenred. Sure. Quite incredible. So when you first came here, what was your first leadership position? What point in your career did that start?
Well, you know, obviously I ended my studies in Japan. So I started as a young graduate in a company that doesn't exist anymore, but a French company in the pharmaceutical industry, which was doing some industrial part, and I worked there for 1 year. And I was representing a small business, some of their products. At that time, you're talking about 1996. You didn't have much foreigners in Japan yet. You had some, but few. So when you were a young guy who could speak some Japanese, graduated from a business school, you could find an interesting job in Japan, representing a company, small business. This is how I started. I didn't have much experience. I didn't have any experience at all, actually. But, the fact that I knew a little bit about Japan, that I could speak some Japanese, was very helpful for such small companies.
How big was that small company?
Well, in France, it's a company that was 300, 400 employees. In Japan, very small. I was actually pretty much the only employee with an assistant. We were the two of us trying to develop the business. It's business development. And then I joined Saint-Gobain, a more established company in Japan, but also in a kind of new business development kind of position.
So Saint-Gobain is really where you started, I guess, to lead people in Japan.
Yes,
in a
absolutely.
Division or a section, right?
Sure, absolutely.
So if we think about that time, and this is like for most of us, right? You come to Japan and you're going to manage Japanese people and you're going to manage in the Japanese environment. This is where things start to get very interesting, and this is where differences pop up and expectations really get exploded and things happen. Think back to that time, your first experiences. What were the things that stepped out to you and you thought, wow, this is not what I expected, or this is different to what I expected, or this is very challenging? What were some of those early feelings? Obviously
very challenging, because when my career is a path. You grow, you mature, and as years pass, and you being a 25-year-old, so with the maturity of a 25-year-old and having to face Japan, you're not prepared. You think you are, because you speak Japanese, because you've been here for some years. But the reality is very different. And you actually tend to reproduce everything that is being sent around you. So, and at that time, you're talking about 30 years ago, Japan was a major power. So in other words, in Japan, do as the Japanese tell you to do. And this is what you tend to reproduce. And this is what you tend to say to your headquarters who are talking to you. You tell them all, the things that are very interesting, but, in Japan we do differently. Japanese are like this and like that, and we should do this and we should do that, and we should be very cautious. Great. But you tend to overdo it, obviously, because you don't have the maturity of somebody who is older and who tends to be able to take what needs to be taken, and. So if I was to go back to these days, where I would pretty much say, Japan is different. You have to abide and you have to, obey to everything your clients, your partners would say. I would say, a bit different. You have to take the important things, but in the end, you have a business. You need to run a business. You need to be successful. You need to be profitable, and therefore you have to push things a little bit. And I can remember that at that time, I had some fantastic days, but some very difficult times as well, because the fact to be a bridge between a foreign business and a Japanese market when you're a 25-year-old, it's very difficult, because you tend to be on the Japanese side all the time. And you know that you learn after some time that you need to be cautious, You can't be always on the Japanese side and say, because in Japan you do this and you should do this and do that. No, you have to be, when you run a business, you need to run it properly. So
let's talk a little about not just the business, right? Running a business or a division, yes, but you've got Japanese staff. So this is you leading Japanese people as a leader.
Yeah.
Dealing with clients, dealing with headquarters, that's all part of it. But this is the core, your first experience to lead Japanese in Japan. Thinking back about that component as a leader, what was challenging?
What is oftentimes challenging, and it was at that time, is it can be difficult to establish, it takes more time, I believe, to establish trust with Japanese people.
Why is that?
I believe that it takes more time for Japanese people to open up. This is the kind of understanding I've had. It takes more time to open up. It takes probably more time, on average, obviously, and people are different from, depending on who they are, but it takes more time. They don't open up that easily. And when you're a leader, you need to be able to establish some kind of communication, some kind of trust, some kind of tie, some kind of bonding in order for the trust to communicate. And when you've been successful, and I think you need to make effort, and this is a leader to make the effort, because in a way, the employee is an employee and he is not the leader in the relationship. I believe that when you, as a leader, you have the ability to establish this communication, this trust, this can lead to something very strong. But it needs to be reasserted, reaffirmed, nurtured all the time, fueled all the time.
How do you nurture that? Now, you're talking about communication.
Yeah.
You probably didn't have as good a level of Japanese at that age as you do now. And probably their levels of English are probably exactly like they are today, which is not tremendously great in the way they're taught English. And you're dealing in English, I presume, rather than French.
Sure.
So how did you nurture that relationship?
I think you have to spend a lot of time. You have to spend a lot of time. You have to open up yourself. I believe it revolves a lot about your ability to communicate, extra-communicate, say about who you are. And it goes, usually Japanese people don't like especially to open up about their families, what they do outside of, work, and if they have children, and what do they do. If you do that yourself, that will, I believe, create a lot of trust and bonding, because they see, okay, this guy is a boss, and a boss means something in Japan. A manager, it means probably something even stronger than anywhere in the world. But if they perceive at some point that, well, you're just a human being, you also have a wife, you have children, you have issues, you do something outside of work, they can relate to you. And I guess this is very important in the creation of the trust with a Japanese population and Japanese staffs. And then, you have to spend a little bit of time outside of the office as well.
How does that mean the classic going out for drinks after
Nominication.
Work, nominication, yes.
The nominication is one word that I learned the first time I came to Japan with one very old Japanese bucho from Canon. He was telling to me, Malik, nominication. What is nominication? Communication, you know what it is? I said, yes, but then you put nomi, which means actually drinking. So the communication through drinking. I said, okay, I understand. So let's go and have a drink. So, yes, you need to spend some time. The sooner you do it, the better. The sooner you open up, the better. Because they feel, okay, they will give you this trust that, open up doors and for a long time.
How about today, though? I mean, that's back at that time. In your current stage, you're the president of the company today. Is that still really relevant? I mean, we see that the younger generation particularly, they don't want to go, like the whole thing about the company travel together, that's gone. The sort of spending time together after work, pretty much gone, particularly the younger people, like, no, thank you. Last time I wanted to spend more time with my boss, seeing him when the work is enough, I want to go with my friends and my family. So do you still do that today, or it's not required today?
I do it less. Obviously. However, I believe that these moments, and I agree with you, I mean, going a whole weekend, going to karaoke, oftentimes it's not especially something that is appreciated to the level it was some years ago. Still, I believe that the ability to create bonding within the team, relationship within the team, and it can be there's, I believe, a wider options than only the karaoke. You can go bowling sometimes. You can go to the restaurant. You can celebrate birthdays. You can do breakfast. I do oftentimes, actually once every 3 or 4 weeks, I do something that I call Let's Talk Together. And I bring 3 or 4 of my employees breakfasting with me. And each time it's a different group of people. And when we go, I tell them, ask me whatever question you want to ask me. And I talk about what I did over the weekend. And I believe this because I'm trying to be as genuine as I can. I believe that, they see me as, okay, this guy is our boss for sure. He's a guy who is, yes, paying us, not from his pocket, but he's a guy who decides. He's not deciding alone. He's deciding with the managers, but he's a human being. So I think this is very important. Really spending the time creating different opportunities, a variety of opportunities. Variety is important. I mean, if you do all the same thing all the time, like it sometimes happened in Japan, it gets boring and you get into something which is not exciting anymore. If you're trying to be creative, doing new things, I think, the staff like it.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. How about engagement? When we see organisations, I don't know about whether Edenred does this globally with staff satisfaction, staff engagement surveys. When I've been in multinational organisations and we get to do these things, And then normally all the country heads, you wind up in some hub somewhere, Singapore or Hong Kong or somewhere. And they're going through all the countries and they're showing, Europe and Americas, and then they get to APAC. And then the numbers for APAC, the average engagement scores for APAC are usually lower than Europe or the Americas or wherever else. And then you get to APAC, and right at the bottom of APAC is Japan. And so people are concluding, the Japanese are not motivated, the Japanese are not engaged, they're not contributing, and you're doing a lousy job as the president there because look at these lousy scores. I don't know whether you get that in Edenred, but I've certainly received that in the past. Do you have such a thing in Edenred, or do you just, you don't have to worry about that, you just worry about engagement from a different angle?
We do have similar trends. In APAC, if you compare, because we are in many countries in APAC, if you compare to South America, we say, these people are amazing, tremendous. The reality is that, the ratings are lower. And now, having said that, what you need to do, you need to work with what you have, and also believing that these ratings that are pretty much usually on average lower than elsewhere, you want to increase them, you want to raise them, So this is what I'm working on. And we did one thing like this last year, and we did it again. In 18, we did it in 19 as well, and I've seen a tremendous improvement. So I'm happy, and I'm happy in my world. I'm not gonna try and compete with South America. I don't think I will ever reach the 95% that they have, but at least if I'm able to progress, improve, I will be happy, because it will means that the Japanese staff, they are Japanese. They go with their standard, they have their way of thinking, they have their way of rating, and probably Japanese staff who is very happy will rate maybe 65%, 70%, where the same people with the same level of happiness in Mexico will rate 95. Okay, fine. We just get to as long as we are aware of this trend, it's okay.
Is headquarters aware of this trend?
They are. They are, because we're an international company, and so we work with international standards, etc. So, but then having said that, I can't be satisfied as being lower than other countries. So I want to raise this, and in order to do that, I believe that the recipes, although I don't like the word, are pretty much the same as anywhere. You need to have projects. Okay, you need to engage people through projects. When people have a mission, when you can onboard them on something, they go for it. So probably you need to explain more than anywhere else. You need to...
Why is that?
I think Japanese people on average tend to want to understand the meaning, the reason, in Japanese, I'm not going to use a Japanese word, but what lies behind? Why are we doing this? What's the purpose? The purpose, the aim, the goal. They need more validation. They need to understand that this is something serious, that the group is believing in this, that there is a real purpose before getting on the boat. But when they understand it, and this is where you need a lot of communication, probably more than anywhere else. And this communication needs to be renewed. It's not because you've said something once. Maybe the Chinese people or the Korean people, and I'm voluntarily use Chinese and Korea because these are neighboring countries, but they would go for it very fast. Maybe sometimes you say, I didn't say to. In Japan, before you are able to have this, group of people moving forward, it will take more time. But when they believe in it, they go for it, and they are extremely precise. They want to do things perfectly. That's why before engaging, it takes more time. So what I'm trying to do actually to tell them, we don't need to be perfect. It's okay if we're not perfect, but let's go for it a bit faster. And you seize it whatever the project is. Sometimes you have issues that are more complicated to deal with. You know, we may have, we had actually a cyber security issue last year, some months ago. And it's interesting because when you have a cybersecurity issue, it's something that is happening all around the world. You know, there's no border for IT issues. But it's interesting how each country will react. And Japan was a bit, you know, it took us 2-3 days to initiate the reaction. You know, it's just like, you know, we're okay, we're fine. It took us 3 days to activate the thing, okay? But when it started, you know, we were on board. But, you know, it's always, it takes more time because people think more, people elaborate or believe that sometimes Japan could be immune. And I'm using the word immune on purpose. The thing is that Japan is not immune, you know. Japan, being an island, sometimes people tend to think that they can be, you know, outside of the world issues. It's also, less and less the case, I believe.
Also the language is an island too. They
Absolutely.
Imagine that hackers won't go after Japan because it's Japanese language, so there's that extra safety net.
Sure.
Or barrier they have there,
sure.
Better than the safety barrier. So yeah, we can be a bit more relaxed about that. Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
There's a bit of this. The culture, the language, the social practices are in a way a barrier, you know, to a certain extent. To a certain extent.
So how's it been going, getting the engagement going? You said you started from what, 2018, so it's been like a year and a half or 2 years. You're actually seeing these projects are working?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, Japan, I mean, it's a great country to work in because I believe that pretty much any business you're in, it will, apart from a couple, it will have a tendency to take more time, okay? It takes more time because it takes more time to convince people. It takes more time for people to listen to you and to, you know, believe in your ideas. And I'm not talking only about clients. I'm talking about your own people. Huh? I'm going to give you an example. We are in the middle of digitalization. Okay, our solution was a solution that used to be, still for some time, delivered through a paper solution. And when I joined here, we had already a digital solution in the form of a card, payment card, but it was not working. And why was it not working? I went to some customers and I said, you know, we have these new solutions. Would you take it? And said, you know, we're fine with this solution. The paper is great. We've been using 25 years the paper. Why should we change? You know, because what we're bringing you is easier to deal with, administrate. It's actually cheaper for you. You know, the administrative burden, it removes a lot of this. Oh yes, Mr. Roumane, but you know, I'm going to have to change. I'm going to have to change things. I'm going to have to talk to my staffs, etc. I said yes, and one of my clients told me, but why don't you actually push us to change by removing you don't give us a choice anymore. You remove your old solution and we won't have only this one. I said, you know, you gave me a great idea.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Probably he understood within his own organization to get a consensus of agreement to move to the better solution was impossible, or not impossible, but extremely difficult within. But outside pressure, gaiatsu, outside pressure would help speed up the whole process and push it over the line for him to get what he thought was actually a good idea. Quite like a mini example of how sometimes Japanese need that external influence to actually push things internally. Yeah, interesting.
In this case, you know, I was going to tell them, look, I'm proposing you this new solution. You don't have to choose anymore because the former solution is going to disappear. So in a way, I'm going to give you 2 years for the transfer, for the change. But now it's no longer I give you the choice. it's this. And then actually the guy in front of me, basically my HR counterparts, would tell me, wow, thank you. Because now I don't have the choice, so I can go to my people and tell them, this is a new solution, it's great, and by the way, this is the only one. So I was removing him from the responsibility and the pressure to have to sell the solution internally. He didn't have to anymore because this was coming from outside. So you can do this actually if you bring something which is serious, which works, and you give them all the security in the move. But it's doable. It's doable. But this is something when you try to explain to your headquarters, they don't understand. Because they say, okay, the guy doesn't want to choose. The guy doesn't want to make a decision. I say, well, no. But if I make him comfortable in moving towards my solution, he'll be happy, very happy to do this. And it's the same internally. When the first time I went to my teams and I told them, we're going to stop the old solution, they went like, green. You want to destroy the company or what? So they start like this. And then you have a first win, a second one, and then the atmosphere completely starts to change.
And then they forget.
They forget, absolutely.
That they were resisting this and was.
And I told them, you remember, right? Sometimes I'm telling them, I'm going to record what you're telling me now, and in a year from now, I would say, and they say, oh yes, you're right, So it's in a way it's an enjoyment because this is what it is, leadership. You have to be the one who, weighing the situation, of course, is making the decisions, the tough calls, and is pulling the whole company.
But do you really want that? I mean, wouldn't you rather be sitting there comfortably in your office with your people constantly coming and saying, Malik, I got this great idea. Malik, I've got this innovation. Malik, I've got this breakthrough. Oh, I can think of some, in Japan, how do we get that type of bring me ideas and solutions from the bottom up rather than we have to be the spark to change? How do we get the Japanese to be more creative?
Yeah, I think, Greg, frankly, exposure to foreign ideas, exposure to foreign countries, training, the ability to open up and not remain in this comfort zone that everybody appreciates. I do also. Sometimes, I have to push myself as well. But this is tremendously important because otherwise, a standard human being, not only a Japanese person, would usually, remain in his bed in the morning and under the blanket, you feel more secure than going out there. But we know that in order for people to grow, in order for people to develop, they need to be exposed to the outside world. And the outside world is education, training, seminars, talking to people, getting inspired.
So how do you bring that to your team? I agree with all of that. Terrific. How does that work in practice?
I'm not surprised, but I'm a strong believer of this, and actually I apply this to myself, okay? What I try to do, up until 10 or 15 years ago, you would have to go and do MBAs and, executive education, you have to go on site, etc. Now more and more, you have the ability to do things differently, shorter courses, online courses. I apply this to myself. So what I secure in my budget on a yearly basis, I secure budget for this for this to happen. So it can be seminars, it can be meeting people outside, it can be going to there's more and more things that are happening all the time, exhibitions.
That's you.
Yeah.
What about your people?
I try to talk to them. try to talk to them and tell them.
Because you talk about getting out of Japan,
Yeah.
getting out of the group that you're in.
Yeah.
Maybe for us as foreigners,
Yeah.
that's, well, I'm coming from a different country. I'm coming from Australia.
Yeah.
So being here is automatically, for me, it's a big experience. And I'm doing that. But for them, maybe their travel is like a lot of Japanese go to Hawaii, where they can speak Japanese the whole time and have an American experience, which is really a Japanese experience in Hawaii. Yeah. And it's not what I would really consider to be a really big foreign experience. And so they have this sort of ability to think they're being international without being particularly international, perhaps. Maybe that's too hard on them. But, their concept of self-education, of going and doing courses online, spending their own money, spending their own time, in my observation here, it does not seem to be well developed. So how do we encourage people to think differently about these things? And like yourself, take some accountability and responsibility for yourself and then try to build your own capacity. How do we get them to do that?
I think that it's probably... for a Japanese standard person, I believe it starts a little bit with English, okay? Although, I believe that more and more trainings like this are held in Japanese. It's great, but I believe that the language is something that already is a first thing. So we, for example, here in Edenred, we insist on people practicing their English. We're actually paying for them to take English lessons, because this is already a first start for them to get out of their envelope, Japanese envelope. Because when you see a Japanese person speaking Japanese and speaking English, there's a lot that is happening, actually. The character changing, the behavior changes when they tend to speak English. So it's great.
And vice versa too.
Sure.
When you switch to Japanese, I'll bet you become a different person. I know I do. I've got my English Greek story and I got my Japanese speaking Greek story, and they're not the same person.
You're right. Maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe we should work on that. But I believe that a language brings along a lot of social practices, behaviors, a lot of what the Japanese are, very introvert in a way. A lot of this is coming with the language for sure. I wouldn't speak in Japanese the way I speak to you right now in English, for sure. So I guess it relates to the ability for them to interact more with, the exterior world, the foreign world, and be exposed to something different. And an online course can be in Japanese, but as long as the ideas are not only based on the Japanese standards, Japanese practices, and Japanese social behaviors or only market, I think it will help them.
This is that what they call in Japanese, the Galapagos Island effect of things developed in Japan for Japan are very, very limited to Japan.
Sure.
And so if they're only being educated in that, there's no real progress. But really, global best practice.
Yes.
Bringing global best practice into Japan gets a tremendous rich environment of the strength of Japan and the strength of the overseas development. That's an ideal situation, I think.
You're right, and I believe on that the digital tools that we are more able to use right now, video conference, teleconference, and I'm not going to cite any names, but all these teams, and so I'm citing names, etc. But all the tools that are enabling people to be connected with each other. And actually to share practices, benchmarks, are probably helping Japan to move into something that is more efficient, more productive, and that is not Japanese only. Personally, I like to be connected to my peers. We're a lot connected with our peers within APAC. We do a lot of these meetings. And it's very interesting for me, and dealing with a crisis like the COVID crisis is something where I learn from my peers in Singapore, in China, in Taiwan, or in Hong Kong, because they have different practices. You know, they were probably because it started in this area ahead of us. But the way they handle the crisis, the creativity, you know, what they are trying to do, teleworking, but at the same time not hibernating, you know, not sleeping with teleworking. The great risk with teleworking is actually the productivity decreases very fast, can decrease very fast. But, you know, they're putting in place
how do we measure that?
Tools.
You know, like, for example, we're in COVID-19.
Yeah.
A lot of companies are working from home. They're not under our gaze in the office. In my office, I can see everybody. I can see who's working, who's not working.
Sure.
But now they're all at home, you know, and I'm at home too. So how, as leaders, can we actually judge that productivity, and how can we actually lead that productivity to make it higher?
You know, this is a great question. I believe that teleworking is something, interestingly, that we've all had in mind for many, many years. In Japan, we were preparing this for the Olympics, so we'll have more time to prepare this. But I mean, yes, there are obviously techniques, there are probably tools, and there are do's and don'ts for sure. You know, I'm not a consultant on teleworking, but definitely you need to be sure that people are ready to work at, you know, the right time in the morning, 9:30. You need to be going to telework like if you were going to the office. So you need to preserve yourself some times where you're going to break. But there needs to be some kind of a discipline put in place. And I believe, as you were putting it, when everybody in the same office, you can see what's happening. Here you have, you know, your eyes are, you know, are not as helpful as they are in the office. So you have to use more technology. You have to organize a little bit more specifically. You need to be on time in the meetings because you don't have to have 7 people waiting in front of the screen so that the 8th and 9th person be ready. So I think even more than when people are at the office, there needs to be a discipline put in place. So I think we actually just started this week teleworking. I'm setting these tools in place and these good discipline, good behaviors, and I think it's a bit on the job training.
Have you created an actual policy on this? For example, here's how we will work, and it's written down. Japanese love to have direction like that. Love it to have it written down. Have you gone to that stage yet?
We have a couple of guidelines. We are actually you know, it's an on-the-job training. So it's an experience that we are doing, and every day we are learning. And so by learning, we are actually feeling more and more guidelines and good practices. So yes, I think we need to do this. And I believe, you know, like in any change, there needs to be a time where things are not perfect, okay? And things are, you know, getting in order and better every day.
In fact, Japanese love to have the manual. You know, I used to be in banking, and they had everything covered in the manual. Now, that was part of its compliance for the you know, financial service agency when you come to have an audit. But also psychologically, you know, they like to be able to go to the manual of do this, do this, do this. So in these sorts of very extreme circumstances like we have now, maybe for a lot of Japanese people, having a sort of pseudo manual of do this, do this, do this is for them perhaps very comforting. Okay, I don't have to think necessarily because I don't have any experience of the situation. I don't have any guidebook or map, but I want something to tell me. So maybe this is where we need to actually, where we in the past trying to get away from the manual and have more spontaneity, more creativity. We're actually, in a way, in a very extreme circumstance, going back to something very manualized.
Probably, Greg. What I believe also needs to be done is when you don't see each other on a daily basis, what you need to make sure is to enhance the communication. So because this is really critical, because when you alone in your, at home, or, there can be a feeling of loneliness,
Well, how do you enhance that communication?
I think you enhance it by communicating a lot more. So organizing meetings, maybe before a meeting, organizing some kind of digital coffee where you would have a 15 minutes prior to the meeting. Everybody gets connected 15 minutes in advance, and you share things, not about the job, but about personal issues. Something that you would do. You would go to the coffee room, and here you don't have the coffee room. You're not physically connected, but you can be connected digitally. Everybody sharing his coffee. So this is what we're trying to put in place in order to enhance this communication. Because when you don't see each other, and especially in a period that is a period that can be stressful, you need to enhance the level of communication. So trying maybe on a daily basis to ask everyone to report about what the person has done today, just to make sure that things are ongoing and are happening, so that we're not talking about having someone behind your back really looking at whether you're working or not, but it's just a question of feeling that you're part of the organization, that there is a structure, that your managers cares about you, cares about what you do, and that, things are running.
I think particularly for Japan too, because it's such a group-oriented culture.
Yeah.
And often they're working together 16 hours a day.
Yeah.
And we're trying to discourage that, but still the reality is often they're working extremely long hours together as a group, and then suddenly, bingo, COVID-19, okay, go home. And now you're not in the group, and they're probably still working 16 hours a day, perhaps, I don't know, but they're not seeing each other. And so maybe I can't speak for France, but Australia is a country where you're taught to be independent from a young age. You must be able to stand on your own feet, be independent, work it out yourself. That's our culture. So for me, hey, no problem. But I didn't grow up in a culture where you depend on the group. Yeah. And so maybe if I'd grown up in that culture and I don't have access to that group anymore, I might be feeling quite unhappy or isolated or fearful or, as you say, lonely. So, Japan maybe doesn't play necessarily to being independent that way. Yeah. And maybe as leaders we have to create that groupism virtually, actually,
No, I agree. I'm actually writing, communicating more than I used to in the past week. What I'm saying by that, I was a lot communicating before this period on a one-to-one basis, and of course sometimes to the group. But now what I'm trying is to have a more communication, the same communication going to the whole group at the same time. I'm putting in place, for example, I don't know if it's going to be Line or WhatsApp, but a group that actually where everybody's going to be connected, so that we can exchange, okay, what did you do today? Send us pictures of yourself, at home, outside, etc. So that, we have something that is digitally, in a way, as lively, differently, of course, as possible, because I think people need this connection, since we are not seeing each other. And I think it can create something very interesting, something we were not doing, but I believe people will show themselves, and at least on my side, this is what I intend to do, in a different way.
Do you think this has changed Japan for the future? I mean, in a lot of countries they're saying that this work from home, teleworking, is actually going to be a change in the way people work going forward. And we've talked about, Japan changing the work style. Hataraku kaikaku, this work revolution. They talk about this before. Boom. COVID-19 has delivered the revolution right now. It's not we're going to ease our way into it. It's here. But do you think it'll last? Do you think that after this virus goes away or calms down, that we'll just go back to all huddling in the office again, or do you think we've actually made a change?
It's a very interesting question. I believe that this could trigger a change. Whether this change will be long-lasting, it's a bit difficult to say right now, but I believe that the good things that we will experience during this period, there's no reason why they shouldn't last. So probably that
What are the good things?
Well, you know, you were mentioning a bit more the ability to take responsibilities, the ability to work for oneself, and probably to produce initiative, to take initiative, is something that I believe in this the present situation we're in will probably the ability of our Japanese population to develop this will grow, I believe. And in a way, the fact not to think as telework as something, oh, we shouldn't do telework, it's bad, I should be at the office and stay long hours. That's probably going to be as well, this is something that can work, this is something that may, you know, produce a more flexible way of working.
Don't lose 4 hours, 3 hours on the train every day.
Absolutely.
Commuting to the office.
Absolutely.
I can actually stay at home and get...
Yeah.
I've learned how to work productively,
Sure.
efficiently.
Yeah.
I save the commute, less people on the trains. It makes
Less
life
paper.
easier.
Less paper.
Less paper, yes.
You know,
another,
the
yes.
paper validation and all the signing, etc. I believe it's going to disappear.
I'm always amused when we print out our invoices. It has a coloured red stamp already digitally in the actual document.
Yeah.
And then we send it by email to the companies.
Yeah.
But we get the phone call, please send us the physical copy.
The physical copy.
So we go to the photocopier,
Yeah.
we print the same thing out, we stick it in an envelope and we send it to them. You know, I often laugh about that. I think to myself, well, what's the difference, you know?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
maybe this type of revolution will change some of that really quite old thinking. But we've talked a lot about leadership so far. Is there anything I haven't asked you which I should have asked you, or anything we haven't covered that we should have covered, do you think? Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now.
Well, there is, a lot of things in Japan that are obviously different from anywhere else. We talked a little bit about the trust, about the necessity, I think, to fuel this trust, because trust is something that when you've actually established trust, you can lose it very quickly. So I believe in Japan, it's something that needs to be fueled all the time, and that is something that can create extremely strong bonds in Japan. The respect also is something that is important. In our company, we have a couple of values, and one of them is respect. And I believe that in Japan, it's something that is extremely important. The ability to talk, as a leader, as a general manager, as a CEO, the ability when you're in a company of the size that enables this, to talk to as many people as possible. I think this is something that is very much appreciated, although sometimes it's not so appreciated by the managers when you talk to their employees, but it's something that is really important. Because I believe, I said this earlier, the notion of the boss, of the president, I think is more important in Japan than anywhere else. Sometimes people work for the president more than for for the for the products, for the employees, or for the company.
Which is a very emotional
Sure.
concept, isn't it? I mean, I often think of the first images I had of Japan was a very unemotional society, very formal, very maybe logical. But the longer I spend here, the more emotionally driven I think decisions are, and the more emotional people actually are in reality. And that concept of loyalty to the person is an emotional concept.
Sure,
it's not a logical concept.
No, not
necessarily.
at all. It's not rational at all, as you say, but it's an essential part of leadership, I believe. And when we talk about leadership, you can have different styles of leadership, but one that is linked to the ability to relate, connect, create the bonding is very, very important in Japan. Sometimes it can get irrational, and you have to be actually careful about this as a leader, because the connection must remain within something that is manageable, because sometimes you can actually make mistakes in the relationship if you're going a bit too far, promising too much. This can be a kind of a trap. So you have to be very careful with this in Japan. But I believe that understanding what you were saying is that initially you can believe that Japanese people are very, unemotional. They are statues, and that they don't really, actually inside a lot of things are happening. So you have to understand this ambivalence, and it's extremely, I believe, essential for a leader in Japan to understand and in a way, play is not the right word, obviously, but deal with this.
So we were going to give, or actually you, we're going to give some advice to someone you've had a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, if you totaled up the number of years for you in Japan, how many years would that be?
I think
now?
it's about 20 years.
20 years, right? So if you take your 20 years of experience in, I counted, I think, 5 or 6 different companies here, and 3 different industries, or 4 different industries perhaps, even across that spectrum. And someone is going to be sent to Japan.
Yeah.
They're going to be sent from somewhere overseas. They're going to be the boss here in Japan. You've been here a long time. You've got a lot of experience. If you're going to give them a couple of pieces of advice as a newbie to Japan, what would those pieces of advice be?
Patience. Share of yourself. Open up. Don't rush into conclusions, and don't believe that you're going to change Japan, because if you believe this, probably you will die before you see any kind of change in Japan. So you have to be persistent. Persistent is very, very important in Japan. But persistent doesn't actually mean being trying to believe that you're going to change Japan fast, because you're going to be exhausted before you reach your goals. So, but you have to be very persistent. This is very important, because if you're persistent, people around you, your teams, your clients, your stakeholders will say, wow, this is somebody we can trust, because this person has a view, has a vision, and he builds on his visions. So I would say persistency, which goes obviously with a good management of yourself, because being persistent, requires a bit of energy. So a good health, good life balance, walking, all these kind of things that appear as common sense in any kind of country, in any kind of geography, but in Japan, it's essential.
You made an interesting point at the beginning about don't become too Japanese to fit in with the Japanese way. You've got to have that ability to say, well, none of you think that we can move from paper to digital, but I believe we can move from paper to digital, and let me bring you with me on the journey from paper to digital, and to not accept this is how we do it around here. That balance is extremely delicate, isn't it?
Very delicate.
Actually, to have that sort of foreigner pig-headedness to sort of be persistent, say, no, I'm sure we can make it, and bring people with you, as opposed to just being swallowed up by, well, this is Japan, we've always done paper for the last 30 years, we're going to keep doing paper for the last 30 years, and by the way, can you send me the details on a fax? You know, I mean, this is where we are. So that's a very tricky balance, isn't it?
Sure. That's a very tricky balance, and you always have to, that's why, you know, I think it's always interesting when you deal with a Japanese business, when you are the leader of a Japanese business, to always keep for yourself the ability to relate to other countries, other benchmarks, because, of course, not everything is applicable in Japan as such, but benchmark ideas, good practices that you can play with, you can take a parts of it, and you can actually exchange with your Japanese counterparts, makes things moving. So you always need to keep for yourself as a leader an eye on what's happening outside, because this will really help you in dealing with the business in Japan.
Well, Malik, thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg.
It's been a very interesting journey through your career in Japan. Fascinating. We could spend hours going back and talking about some of those other companies you work for, because I know there's lots of stories in there as well. Maybe we'll do that on another day. I'd like to thank Malik very much for sharing all of his experiences so far in Japan. It's been very interesting to hear him talk about those. And please join us again for our next episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews.